I'm the Failure Guy. Welcome to the podcast. On today's episode of the Failure Guy podcast, my guest is Stan Morse, co-founder of One NYCHA Advocates. Stan, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the conversation.
Absolutely. Glad to be here. My pleasure.
Okay, so Stan, one of the things I like to do when we get the podcast started, of course, we have known each other for years, but most of the people out in podcast land don't know who you are. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell the folks a little bit something about you?
Sure. My name is Stan Morse. I am the former candidate for Queensborough president in 2021. I've been a community activist for the past, really all my life. But for the past 5 to 6 years at the Justice for All Coalition, who I left to begin my organization, One NYCHA Advocates. And the primary focus of my work and what I'm about is helping and fighting for NYCHA residents who are going through the most incredible, horrific situation imaginable. It's very important to me because I grew up in NYCHA. So my fight for residents living in public housing is very personal and very critical. And it's really the purpose really of my life, at this point in time as we speak right now. It's what my total focus is on and what I'm about.
Okay. Now, of course, for those of us in the New York area, we know what NYCHA stands for, but for the benefit of our national and international listeners, why don't you explain to them what the acronym NYCHA expands to, and give us a little bit about background about NYCHA in general, your growing up there, and why you feel the need to start an advocacy on behalf of NYCHA and its residents.
So NYCHA stands for New York City Housing Authority. So there's public housing all across the country. But in New York, it's called NYCHA, New York City Housing Authority. I was born in NYCHA in 1963, and public housing came to New York in and around that time, in the 60s, early 60s, late 50s. And the reason why public housing was built in New York and around the country, obviously, is because the lack of affordable housing that existed then and now, but so much more now than then. And they also wanted to build something for people coming home from the war and such. So they created this public housing here in New York City. For those middle-class residents, people coming home for the war, and folks needing a leg up in a challenging New York City economy, coming from tenements and things of that nature. So when I moved in to Lafayette Gardens in Bedford-Stuyvesant in 1960, I was born there, and my family moved in. We were one of the first families in that development. And I can tell you the first few years that I can recall, beautiful, beautiful development. Couldn't walk on the grass, couldn't write graffiti on the walls in the hallway, couldn't hang out in the lobby. You really had to keep the place up. You had to keep the place clean. There was a sense of community then. We all got along. We also had housing police. I want to make sure I mention that. And we knew who they were. They knew who we were. So it wasn't like NYPD coming in and not really knowing the community. These folks knew us, and we respected them. They respected us. When I was around maybe 9, 10, 11 years old, I began to see the change. I, as a kid, didn't know what was happening, but I saw that, all of a sudden the place wasn't as clean as it used to be. You saw graffiti on the wall now. You saw people hanging out in the hallways now. You saw, obviously, piss in the middle of the elevator now. I saw feces in the staircase now. I saw people getting high in the staircase now. You had to literally go through all this sometimes just to get to your apartment. Now the elevators are broken now. The intercoms don't work. So I'm like, as you're growing up, what's happening? Why is my community falling apart? And there was a guy, and I wrote a book. There's a gentleman named Maynard who was our housing cop police. And I remember the day he got beat up. I remember the day that the housing police sort of disappeared, and then the gangs took over. You had the Jolly Stompers, the Black Spades. It was a totally different environment in a matter of about, 5 or 10 years. It was overnight. It became something totally different. And for those who don't know, Lafayette Gardens is one of those notorious housing developments in New York City. And so as I've come to be a community organizer, I've seen this experience as a child. My neighborhood changed and it became a cesspool, from a beautiful neighborhood, an oasis, to a cesspool. And why that has happened is there's been decades and decades and decades of disinvestment by the federal government, starting with HUD, by the city government and the state government. So over years of not investing in NYCHA, it deteriorated to the point that it is now completely uninhabitable for many, many people who are living with rats, roaches, mold, asbestos, lead. It's endless, and I've seen it decay. And the sad thing about it, as a child, as a child growing up in Lafayette Gardens, you always heard, oh, well, the projects are going to be sold. And, oh, well, things are going to be happening. The neighborhood's going to change. Well, the neighborhood did change around Lafayette Gardens. Like it's changed around most of these NYCHA developments. But the conditions in NYCHA has deteriorated. And now we've gotten to the point where they're trying to privatize and take over NYCHA. And for those who watch Good Times and Cabrini Green, if you saw Good Times, Green got knocked down. So now we're at the stage in NYCHA where they're about to demolish NYCHA developments as well. And this is probably the biggest real estate scenario possible. So I'm committed to this fight because if I'm not going to fight and we don't fight, there'll be no more public housing, no more NYCHA, no more nothing.
Okay. Now, just in terms of expanding acronyms, you mentioned HUD. That's the Housing and Urban Development, right? HUD?
Yes.
And that's a federal agency.
Federal agency, yes.
Right. Okay. Now, interesting. You mentioned things. I'm 3 years older than you. I was born in 1960, and I did not live in public housing. But my best friend in high school, his father was a NYCHA cop.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's what he. And I don't know what NYCHA facility he did. I don't know if they went to different facilities or if he was in one place. But I do remember he was the first person that I personally knew that was someone who had a badge and carried a gun. And,
right.
But I was also aware of the fact that he was not NYPD. In fact, he was kind of cynical about NYPD. Because remember, this is back in the early to mid 70s. So I'm thinking, but you're a cop. And he was like, no, I'm a NYCHA cop. That's a whole different thing. The second thing, and this is we have known each other for quite a number of years now. But you mentioned one of the gangs. You mentioned the Jolly Stompers, and that was a gang that plagued my junior high school, which was Winthrop Junior High School, Junior High School 232. And I remember that there were days when there were going to be gang rumbles. We were let out of school early, and they surrounded the school block with cops. Yeah. So this is like 1972, 73. This is the level of where gang stuff was. And remember, this is junior high school, middle school to those of you.
Yep. Had the same experience in junior high school in 17. It was a whole different era back then. They were the Tomahawks, Jolly Stompers, Black Baby.
That's another one. Oh my God, all of those names. Yes, Tomahawks. See, this is, like I'm saying, I'm getting whiplash from the flashback here. I haven't heard those names since I was an adolescent.
Absolutely.
But wow, that is an unfortunate memory in many ways. But yes, I remember hearing these names dropped in conversations, seeing the graffiti tags on the walls, and all of this sort of thing, and just hearing the rumors that there's going to be a rumble, and all I knew was it was like, get your little behind home, and you ain't going to be around there. Now, when I graduated from high school in 77, actually shortly after the 1977 blackout, my family moved to Rochdale Village, which is a co-op in Queens. Mm-hmm. So while it's not public housing, it went through a similar path of progression. That when we moved in there, it was pristine. It was amazing. It had 2 shopping malls of its own. It had the tennis courts. It had a movie theater. The public greens were amazing. And, by the time I left to join the Air Force in 1980, it was starting its decline, and then shortly thereafter, my folks moved out. Moved down to South Carolina. But it's kind of on a resurgence, and that might have to do with the fact that it's a co-op and it's not public housing. It hit a trough that was very similar to what you're talking about. NYCHA is going through, and I know it's not just that residence that you're referring to, but just NYCHA in general. And now, so we've had discussions, of course, before this, and part of why, at least this is your, I don't even want to say suspicion, because you have very informed what's happening inside. Mm-hmm. This is because they want to devalue the property so that they can sell it off to private interests and then turn it into a profit-making center. correct?
That's correct. That's exactly it. There's a word actually in their documents when they describe their privatization plans, and that word is called obsolescence. You know, if you look up the word obsolescence, it means to actually let something fall into decay, to ignore. And that's what they did. They literally let it fall all apart so that the residents living there will now be starving and desperate for repairs.
And they
So
actually
therefore,
wrote this out in official documents. They're not even hiding.
It's in writing, so I'm not making this up. It is literally in their own document. You know, in the PAT, which is one of the funds, it's PAT, Blueprint, and RAD. So those are the three privatization plans as well as infill. And in the RAD PAT document itself, which I read when I was a community organizer for the Justice for All Coalition, I read it and it said it right in its own black and white. Sometimes they tell you, if you want to hide something, put it in the book. They tell us that.
Exactly.
Well, you can see what they're talking about right in their own document.
Yes.
And it's like, you know, it's heartbreaking. So it's done on purpose to starve people and make them desperate. And then here comes a private developer now. Oh, you need a new stove. You need to get the mold out your house. You need to get the lead out your house. You need a new refrigerator. You need a new front door. Your intercom fixed. Well, here I come to fix it. I'm going to get all this money now from city contracts. It's an $80 billion real estate deal. We're talking about $80 billion to repair nitrous. So these private developers come in here, they get tax breaks from the city, from our federal government and city government. And they get a sweetheart deal, almost a no money down deal. The NYCHA maintains the lease of land, but they take over the management. They get all the contracts to do all the repairs. And they make a ton of money, and they ultimately will walk off with a big bag. And what we've already seen is that once they've come in there and done that, in some of the buildings that have been converted, the eviction rates are going up. People are being displaced. You know, the stoves that they bought are breaking down. So is the refrigerators. The mold is coming back. You know, so all the repairs they're doing is really cosmetic at that.
Right. So this was piecework and patchwork just so they could collect those government contracts and look like they were doing something getting paid. Now, you know, for those of you out there watching or listening to the podcast who think that this is all conspiracy theory, when I was in my 20s, in the 1980s, I hung out with my punk rock friends who were living in a squat on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It was called Alphabet City. You know, the part of southern Manhattan where the alphabets go east of First Avenue and they are lettered A, B, C, and D. And I remember hanging out at this one squat. First of all, my joke was that even though I'm a black guy from Brooklyn, I never, when I was hanging out initially there by myself, I never went further east than Avenue A. Because back in the 80s, why would I have been any further east in that area? Because I was not Puerto Rican or Dominican. I was not selling drugs. I did not have a gun. Those were very dangerous neighborhoods back in the day.
Absolutely.
And there was a group of musicians, like an artist collective, and they squatted in this building. Now remember, these squats were mostly city-owned buildings. This was not public housing, but these were buildings that were owned by the city that were left to rot. And when I say rot, I'm talking exposed walls, leaking ceilings, whatever have you. The people who lived in this squat, they would have dogs that were pit bulls and Rottweilers. And when I found out the reason they had those dogs was to protect them from the rats at night.
Wow.
This is how bad it was. Now, these folks, they sweat equity these buildings together. A lot of them, you know, they had jobs. They worked in construction sites. They would get sheetrock. They would get PVC plumbing. You know, they would, and they rehabbed these buildings to the point that they were habitable. The ceilings aren't leaking. You know, some of them are roofers. They'd go up to the roof. These are things. These are city-owned buildings, still on the books. The city just left them to rot. Here's the thing that got me, which is why, whatever people may think of former Mayor Rudy Giuliani, I have nothing good to say about him. While he was mayor, not when these buildings were in a complete state of disarray and people had to have pit bulls and Rottweilers to protect them from the rats because cats would have gotten the behind beam. After they turned them habitable, then he had them evicted under health concerns.
Wow.
And of course, once they were evicted from these buildings, they were flipped over to private contractors who just had to slap on some fresh paint, put some crown molding, and turn them into condominiums.
Yep. Same story here.
Yes.
I mean, pretty much same story here.
So when you talk about
yeah.
that pathway, I just want people to understand. I recounted that to say Stan's not making up stories. Okay, there's historical precedent for this. These are government managed and maintained buildings, city public housing, and they are deliberately letting them fall fallow and go into obsolescence so that they can drive the people out, flip them, make them private, and then they're going to all the repairs, not the little piecemeal half-assed repairs that they're doing now.
Right.
Then they're going to do it right because they can charge the absurd New York City rents that we're getting now. And by way of how bad are New York City rents, if you go to the Empire State Building, if you walk along Madison Avenue in the 20s and 30s, you're going to see stores for lease or rent. These are some of the most prestigious real estate in the city. And Stan, if you can't afford the rents to have a storefront on the base of the most visited tourist attraction in New York City, the Empire State Building, how high are the rents? Because you know the walk-in traffic, dude, if you had a curio shop, if you had a shop selling t-shirts and tchotchke and knickknacks at the base of the Empire State Building, you should just have enough walk-in traffic to cover you, period. But there are vacant storefronts because despite that fact, the rents are so high that they can't afford to pay the rent to make a decent living at the base of the most visited tourist spot in the entire city of New York.
There you go. That's exactly what's happening. Yep.
Yes. And so what led you to not only just be, actually tell us a little bit about your public advocacy work and how you ended up branching out and forming your own organization. Take us through that journey.
Yeah, I was a community organizer for the Justice for All Coalition, organizing in Queensbridge, the nation's largest housing development, Ravenswood, Astoria houses. Did that for about six years. Initiated a lawsuit against Queensbridge for lack of repairs, and was in the midst of having a lawsuit in Ravenswood, Ravenswood, Astoria houses as well. You know, but then because of all of this activist work, and also at that time Amazon was trying to come into Long Island City, right next to where Queensbridge was. So we organized against that, and I guess doing all of that, I got a lot of attention, a lot of media attention, was on a couple of news stations and press conferences and things of that nature. And so I was asked to run for office, meaning Queensborough president.
Right.
So that was good and bad. Because what ended up happening is I got kicked out the race. I was told by a prominent elected official whose name I won't mention, but she told me, Stan, it's really not your time. When she found out about my campaign, and she's a good friend and actually worked with me in my organizing work. She said, this really isn't your time. And I didn't really know what she was talking about. But then not too long after she said that, word came out that my campaign was jeopardizing my job. You know, the funding for my job and my campaign couldn't coexist at the same time. So it was either run for office and quit your job, or keep the job and no run for office. So.
Right. And your running for office wasn't paying your bills. So
exactly.
I totally understand why you made the choice you had to make.
And then I got fired also. And I wouldn't say fired. Because of the conflict that was happening, you know, I got kind of caught in a situation where you're not really community organized anymore. Are you community organized? Or are you a candidate? Like, really, what are you? And that caused a lot of confusion within my own organization that I work for. You know, and so ultimately it ended up with me and the organization parting ways. But this work is so personal to me. I don't get paid for the work now. You know, this work that I've been doing for the last 2 to 3 years with my partner, Sandrea Coleman, is because I'm known out here amongst NYCHA residents. People still call me. My flyers have been throughout all these developments. So I had to stay involved. So we first formed the One NYCHA podcast to keep talking about these issues once I lost my job, so to speak. And then we brought Chuck Schumer on. We had Alvin Bragg on. We had Congressman Callie Maloney on. We had a platform to really reach out to NYCHA residents. And actually, to me, became more powerful than the job that I actually had. So when God closes one door, a better door opens. You know, so now I'm talking to NYCHA residents citywide, as opposed to just residents in Long Island City. And I'm continuing to work. Now it's become a ministry where it's not about the money. It's about the work. But the podcast was great. You can have all the people in the world. You got the Chuck Schumers, all these big names. But when Sandra and I really talked about it, is this really moving the needle? It made Kevin High more popular. But are we really more? We have as much impact as we possibly can. We both decided to no, we cannot. We're not. So we formed One Night Advocates, which will be the community organizing part of One Night, where we will go out, have meetings in the community like I used to do, and really engage NYCHA residents at this most critical time, because as we talk about this privatization, there is a vote that they're giving NYCHA residents. So they're saying, well, you have the choice to decide for yourself. But there's only one side of the story being told. So all they're getting is information from NYCHA. Here's NYCHA's narrative as to why we should privatize. Here's the pros for that. But what about the cons? What are the risks?
Right.
And that story's not being told. The NYCHA residents are not hearing about that. There's a lot of corruption going on in these conversions. There's suspicion of TA presidents getting paid off. So there's a lot going on. So the NYCHA residents are being uninformed and also being steamrolled in this whole process. So the need for information, the need for community organizing, the need to get out and knock on some doors. A podcast is great, but we need to knock on some doors, have some meetings, and talk to some people face to face, one on one, before they get kicked out and displaced from their homes across the city.
Right.
And so that's why we formed this One Night Advocates to go along with the One Night podcast, because we're in the last stages now. 1/3 of NYCHA is already gone.
Wow.
And there are plans for the other 2/3 to be gone. So we can look in 5 years from now, there will be no more public housing in New York City and also the entire country.
Right.
And
so let me ask you something, Stan. To the
Mhm.
point that you just mentioned. First of all, what is the estimated population of residents in New York City public housing? About how
they
many?
give an estimate. Yes, they say 700,000, but it's more than that. We know we know it's more than that. You got uncles, cousins, on the lease. The number's bigger than that.
Right. So the official estimate is 700,000. Probably we're talking maybe 1.2 million. Would that be a reasonable estimate?
Yeah,
probably
absolutely.
that's still conservative. So I asked that to say, what becomes the fate of these people if NYCHA, they're in public housing because they can't afford to pay fair market value rents in New York City? It's ridiculously expensive. So they shut down under whatever pretense. They privatize and then they price these people out. Where do they go? What happens to them?
That's $1 million question. Most of them are being forced to leave the city, move down south, or that's what's happening, or become homeless. I know some residents that had to leave NYCHA and go into a homeless shelter. So these are the scenarios, these are the situations, and to me, it makes no sense living in a city, as you and I both know, where rent is insane. To get rid of any type of housing, that the good part about NYCHA is 30% of your income. If you lose your job, you still got an apartment. If you have no income, they're not supposed to charge you rent. So it's built in such a way that it can always be affordable. That don't exist. It don't exist nowhere else. So when you get rid of these folks and they can't afford the market rate rent, then they're gonna have to leave New York. Right. And that's what we're finding, not just for NYCHA residents, but there's a flight of people out of New York, period, because you can't afford to stay here. It's too much.
Well, yeah, I was thinking that because, we hear the term quite often, affordable housing, but affordable housing is kind of based on two factors. First of all, what kind of a living, what kind of an income can you earn within the city? And then secondly, what are the base rents in the city? Because you can be working. I mean, as you say, a good number of the NYCHA residents, they're not unemployed. They're probably underemployed. Because given the rents, these are not all people in the dole. See, and I want to bring out this point because people out there listening are thinking, well, public housing, they're all welfare cases. No, they're not. A lot of them are working. It's just for the love of all that's holy. Like I said, when retail business, I used to contract back in the teens, the 20 teens, with a guy that had an office. I was subcontracting. I'm an IT professional. And he had an office at 1 Union Square West. So afterwards, I would walk up Madison Avenue, to head back to Grand Central Station to head home. And now Madison Avenue, as you know, Madison Avenue from like the Union Square from like the high teens up to the 40s, up to you get to what used to be the Pan Am building, now the Metropolitan Life building. That is premier real estate. That is
Absolutely.
high quality. That's your Cartiers, your Givenchy's, your brand names, your Balenciagas, and all this kind of nonsense. And I remember walking up these streets and seeing sometimes two storefronts on the same block: store for rent, store for lease.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one day, because usually I'm listening to music in my earbuds and I'm not paying attention, but I was like, hold up a second. I'm not in the South Bronx. I'm not in the desolated parts of Brooklyn. I'm not in Harlem. This is prime central. And
Absolutely.
these storefronts are driven out because it used to be back in the day. That's prime real estate. If you got any money and you want to sell to your Audi, Mercedes, Gucci watch, Rolex watch wearing crowds, that's where you'd set up a storefront. And those folks can't afford to pay the rent in New York.
Yeah.
So if they can't afford the storefronts on Madison Avenue, how in the world is a working class person supposed to be able to afford to pay rent in a New York City apartment? And this is why, because I know I'm not saying, and I say this kind of to set you up, that being a housing advocate is about more than just where can people live and how much are the rents. It's about a whole lot of other aspects that have to be considered. Right?
Yeah, and I want to say, in full disclosure, I mean, I know our mayor is under intense pressure, with the court cases that he's dealing with. Yes. But in full disclosure, I'm part of the mayor's office as an impacted advocate because I was once homeless and I was once with my two kids, and I'm also fighting for affordable housing. So I'm in this organizational group as an impacted advocate, and I've gone to City Hall, and I've been exposed to the City of Yes, which is the mayor's new plan for affordable housing. We was in there in the very beginning phases when it was being crafted, and I'm sitting there listening, and I guess we're there because we're supposed to go to our community as so-called community leaders and sell this plan and convince the neighborhood in our communities that this is a good thing before they bring it to the city council.
Right.
So I'm doing these meetings. So I'm in an affordable housing meeting, and I'm like, we're talking about affordable housing. So the main question came up. It wasn't asked by me. It was asked by another advocate there.
Right.
And he said, what about AMI? Now, AMI is called area mean income. If you don't get rid of AMI and MIH, these are the two models that affordable housing is built on here in New York City. And what that means is that if I'm living in Bed-Stuy and the average income in Bed-Stuy is, let's say, $35,000.
Right.
So if I'm trying to build houses for people that live in Bed-Stuy, I should be building houses for people with the average median income of maybe $35,000, $40,000. But no, what they do is they take income from Scarsdale, income from other parts, more wealthier parts of the community, not even within the 5 boroughs.
Right.
And they add those incomes into the area mean income of our communities. So now the numbers are skewed now. Now the numbers are no longer making sense.
Right.
So when people say, well, why are we building housing that's not affordable for the people that live there? It's because you have area mean income and MIH, which all affordable housing in New York City is based upon. So there's these formulas. So in that meeting, one of the advocates asked, well, since we're talking about affordable housing, can we talk about MIH and can we talk about AMI? And they said those two topics are off the table.
Wow.
We can't even discuss them.
Wow.
We're not talking about those things. Here goes our proposal, and here goes the City of Yes, and we want to do this, we want to do that. Wow. So if you're not really talking about those two things, AMI and MIH, then you're not really talking about really affordable housing.
It reminds me of the old Mark Twain joke that there's 3 types of falsehoods. There's lies, there's damned lies, and there's statistics.
Right. Well,
and as folks, okay, this is not a math lesson, folks, but for those of you who took math back in the day, there's 3 types of of averages. Okay,
Right.
there's the arithmetic mean, which is you take all of the numbers, you add them up, you divide it by the number of numbers you have, and that mathematical figure that you have. Now, of course, if we're talking incomes, that's going to be skewed because you got a handful of very, very, very rich people, and most of the people are poor. But if you add those rich
Yep.
salaries, you add them all together and then divide by the number of people, then you've got your what's called your modal income, which is you take the number of things and you pick the one right smack in the middle. You stack them from lowest to highest. You pick that one. That, of course, is ridiculous. That's not anything. Then you have, and I'm sure you would agree, what you ought to have, which is your median average, which is what number do most people fall under. Most people don't make millions and tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in the New York City area. The average New Yorker makes somewhere between maybe $30,000 and $70,000 a year. That's the spread. And if you were to make affordable housing for them, that's affordable housing. The affordable housing for what's going up on Billionaires Row, these tall, skinny, buildings that are on the perimeter of Central Park, which are, millions of dollars for rent? For rent?
Right.
Are you kidding me? And then you're going to throw that into the average?
There you go. And then we have something that we have now, which is housing is not affordable to nobody. Then they have the formula: 20% will be so-called affordable, which is not affordable, and then the other 80% is market rate, which is through the roof. Yeah. And so that's the whole affordable housing plan or scam, I would say. Yeah. And we're left caught, the middle class and regular hardworking people. And I want to get back to the point you just spoke about NYCHA. Many hardworking people. There's people paying $1,900 in NYCHA. Yeah. Don't get it wrong. Don't think that everybody in NYCHA is poor. During the pandemic, there were NYCHA people, residents that live in NYCHA were the essential workers going out, making sure we had food and working in these stores and doing the labor that other people couldn't do during the pandemic. A lot of people lived in NYCHA. Yes. Hardworking people that put their lives on the line and got no help from Cuomo at the time, and I could speak to that. I was going through these buildings during that time. And, people have a total misconception. These are hardworking, professional people that deserve a decent home.
Isn't it funny who shows up as an essential worker depending on the experiences? Because right now, at times of recording, just so people can know, this is November of 2024 as we're recording this. The mayor that Stan was referring to is, of course, Mayor Eric Adams, who is under federal investigation. And we just had a presidential election, which Donald Trump won, and so by the time you hear this, that probably may even be in the transition of the next century. But flash backwards a few years during the pandemic shutdown, okay, and isn't it interesting that the same people who were being looked down upon as the big problem, the people that Trump is promising he's going to export by the tens of millions, immigrants, suddenly they become essential workers because they gotta pick the vegetables and gut the chickens because people want their unlimited salad bowls at Chipotle's and Olive Garden and Applebee's, and they want to buy that 8-piece bucket of chicken. Okay, and all of a sudden they come from being the people we got to build a wall to keep out to being the people that can't stay home because they're essential workers.
Exactly. We saw that with NYCHA, and I do want to, since you mentioned Trump and HUD, NYCHA falls in the HUD. So we've already seen the clowns that Trump has appointed, in his cabinet. He's going to appoint somebody for Hudson, So I'm waiting on pins and needles to see who he's going to appoint. The last guy he appointed was the surgeon. What was that guy's name? Ben Carson.
Ben Carson.
Ben Carson. Right. Why in the world would you appoint a surgeon to over HUD? It's like, and he did a horrible job. I mean, horrible.
Of course, because you would think that he might, maybe you put him in charge of the FDA, or maybe you put him in charge of National Health Institute. Exactly. But you put him in charge. What are his qualifications?
You put a person in charge of housing. It's like, you can't make this stuff up. You really can't. So I'm afraid of who he's going to appoint now. Yeah. Because we're in the balance here. We're trying to get rid of public housing, get rid of NYCHA. If he puts the person in there that comes in there with the big sledgehammer, and the bulldozer,
Yes.
these plans we're talking about might get accelerated,
Yes.
and then we could be in a world of trouble.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
so
And I
it's real.
tend not to be political in this podcast, but of course I discuss with my guests what is to the guests because I'm having a conversation with you. It's not that I'm not a. Here's the thing: I'm not a political person. I'm a person. I'm a citizen of the United States. And as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, in 2016 I had the pleasure of being flown to France for 8 days for a 2-day lecture series on entrepreneurship and empowerment. And you know me from my work with my business, Community IT Solutions, and you know that I'm an advocate for entrepreneurship. I believe that entrepreneurship is empowerment for Black communities so that we can control our lives and create our future. And
Absolutely.
here's the thing: I will give anyone a chance. Now, I was there, and when I was in France, I had the privilege and the benefit of being a guest at the first United States embassy ever established, the Paris embassy, which was established by Benjamin Franklin. And I was in the basement of that in September of 2016. So the election had not yet come. This is the election in which Donald Trump was elected the first time. And I asked one of the embassy staff, I says, let me ask you something. Why did you choose embassy work? This wasn't an ambassador. This was a staff member working in the embassy. And he said, well, he'd just come from somewhere in the Mediterranean, and he was there in Paris now, and then he was going to go after a couple of years somewhere else. And I says, why did you choose this line of work? And he says, well, here's the thing. I love my country. I love America. I know, like any other country, it's got its issues that needs to be worked with. It's got its flaws and its faults. But I am proud to be an American, and I am grateful for the opportunity to travel the world and share the best that my country has to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And then he walked away. We're at a little wine and cheese thing, so I got a little wine and little crudités and whatever have you. And I'm standing there and I'm looking at the American flag and I'm thinking about it, and it's like, if I were in this embassy when it was established in the 1700s, I would have either been somebody's manservant or somebody's property. And
Right.
Here I am as an independent businessman. I've got my own LLC. I just published my book. And I was there as a representative of American entrepreneurial spirit. And what occurred to me then is that without at all denying any of the work that still has to be done,
Mm-hmm.
the beauty part of America is not that it's perfect, but that it's not perfect. Okay, when those guys wrote the Declaration of Independence, they knew that it was kind of crap, that they're writing a document saying all men are created equal and they themselves own other men. They knew that document was not about them. That document was an aspirational document about the world they saw them having the potential to build, which in the 1700s, remember, this is the age of aristocracy. Most of the great nations were monarchies. So this premise was absurd. What, you're going to let the remember, the French had tried that around the same time, and we saw how successful the French Revolution didn't go.
Right.
And so the audacity to think that, first of all, to propose to write a document like that, and the world is calling you on your BS. Like, yeah, right? Like, we don't know what's going on over there. And yet, 2016, there I am, with my locks down to my waistline, my own business because I said so. I paid the couple $100.
Right.
I formed my LLC. I had my curriculum of business development. I was doing workshops for more than 5 years. I wrote a book. I was there because of the work I was doing, the pro bono work I was doing with Operation Hope. The group that came over there, they came to a bunch of NGOs and not-for-profits looking for a representative, but I was better than even your friend and mine, Pedro Barry, who at the time was their small business development, whatever his title, I forget what his title was at the time. And I say all of this as a preamble to say, I wonder the people who are creating these policies that are driving the working class. The strength of any nation is the common people. It's not the privileged. It's not the elites, because the elites only survive because the common people, as you said, the hardworking people are out here doing the daily work on the daily grind, keeping things moving forward. For example, I say to people, why did they give out those stimulus checks during the pandemic shutdown? It wasn't because they cared so much about Joan Q. Public and Joe Sixpack. It's because they understood that if people stayed home and didn't shop, there is no economy. Walmart is not worth $1 billion. Walmart is not worth anything. Walmart has billions of dollars of revenue. If people stop shopping at Walmart, Walmart stock plumbs down into penny stocks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And notice they gave everybody, they didn't give you enough money to pay your mortgage. They didn't give you enough money to really make. They gave you just enough extra money to go out and spend it. To spend it at the stores, because that keeps the wheels of the economy grinding. And why the people, the powers that be, don't understand that if you don't create enough affordable work and you don't make affordable housing, you're going to have a company that resembles the worst parts of the poverty-stricken areas of India or places in Malaysia or the failed states in Africa. That's what America is going to start looking like. And I don't have a problem with there being rich people. I don't have a problem with there being wealthy people. But we can't have an economy that caters only to them, because that becomes a top-heavy society that eventually is going to collapse under its own weight. And we can keep on going about this, Dan, but I also want to talk with you about your book. And I know there's stuff about what we're talking about here as yourself as a public advocate, but I really want to get to the remaining time that we have in this conversation to talk about your book. So please.
Yes, the book is called God's Grace. It's my memoir. I've had a very interesting life. You know, before I got to this point of being an advocate and fighting for nice residents, I was in the real estate field, which is why I know a lot about what's going on in Nice. This is really a big $1 billion real estate deal, magnified more or less. You know, and also had an addiction to drugs. I was on crack for probably more than 10 years. You know, so getting to the real estate part, I probably at the time lost in real estate value probably the total of maybe $45-50 million in real estate at that time. So if I was to sit back and really figure out or think about what that would be worth in today's money, it would be probably maybe 150, 200 million. It's a lot of money.
Wow.
52 properties in New Jersey at one point. We had properties in New York when they were worth 100,000 and 200,000 that are now worth 1.2 and 2 million. We had it way back then. And so I had the experience, the unfortunate experience of doing business with some of the wrong people. You know, I bought some property, borrowed some money, unfortunately from a drug dealer, and that created issues in my life, you know, that were beyond control, where we actually got extorted, you know, from this drug dealer and some other bad decisions that were made. And when I found it in business, and then when I eventually got addicted to crack, you know, it was a lot of the same issues and same problems that was within me. You know, it just came out, manifested itself in drug addiction. But in making those decisions, I knew better than to borrow money from a drug dealer. You know, I was raised better, and I knew better.
Yes.
You know, and I was raised better. You know, but I made decisions, you know, that were very, very costly. That almost cost me my life. My house got shot up. People were looking to kill me. It became a whole big scenario, and that's the first real estate scenario. So we eventually got out of all of that. Ended up owing $300,000 to some people. Paid all that back off, but lost those properties in the beginning of the New York explosion. We had about 7 or 8 properties that today are probably worth, I can't imagine. But we had them when they were $200,000, $300,000. They're all worth $2 million and more now in Bed-Stuy, Park Slope, Harlem, and all that. But then we got the second wave. My partner and I, my cousin, we got involved in New Jersey real estate because New York was so oversaturated. We started buying properties in New Jersey. Ended up buying 52 properties in 1 year.
Wow.
You know, and became very, 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 I guess, made a lot of money. And then we ended up buying a club in Manhattan, or investing in the club, the Millionaires Club at 30 West Street, downtown in the Diamond District. But back to my poor decision making. The poor decision making is to mess with somebody that sold drugs. I borrowed money from him. The people that I'm involving myself in business, you gotta understand, real estate back then was a wild, wild west.
Yes.
The banks were crooked. The banks were in on it.
Yes.
which is why we had the crash in
The
2006, the
subprime
whole
mortgage.
financial, right, the
Yeah.
subprime. And I was in the subprime real estate game. So this
Mm.
was like the wild, wild west. We had all types of individuals, people involved. So one of the banks that I ended up doing business with ended up being connected to the mafia. And then that became a whole big thing. And it just, so I'm
Wow.
like, why all these things happening to me? Why am
Wow.
I constantly making all this money and doing all these great things, and I'm running into all these incredible obstacles?
Yes. So
And
you
I
went
realized,
from just a local drug dealer to the mafia.
to the
Talk about
mafia,
talk about jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire.
it was being investigated for murder, extortion, bank fraud, and all of this stuff. And I'm like, you're constantly putting your life at risk. I mean, something is going on here. It is not normal for someone to have achieved this and then throw it all away, lose it all, and at the same time almost lose their life and people trying to kill them. And then comes crack. So
Oh
all
my
of this is
God.
going on. All of this is before crack, all this other drama, and then
Whoa.
comes some crack stuff too in the midst of all of this. So
Wow.
I realized there was something wrong with me. When you look at mental health and you look at mental illness and you look at those issues, it was very, very, I guess, freeing for me to realize, I'm not just stupid. What am I, an idiot? I'm just losing all this money. What am I, a fool? Like, what's the matter? You must be a failure. Which is what I walked around for many years looking at myself. I got to be a failure, the dumbest person in the world. How could you have had all this money and you don't have nothing now and you're homeless? How do you go from all of this and now you're homeless with two kids and you're in a homeless shelter, from a mansion to a shelter? What are you doing? And so I had to really take a look at my life and take a look at myself and the decisions I was making and the things that I was involved in. And chasing money just for the sake of money really wasn't for me.
Wow.
Which is what I was about. All my marriages, married twice, cheating, broke up marriages, all this craziness. My life was in total chaos. And if I didn't change, I was going to either die, go to jail, something was going to happen. I was not going to be able to continue on this earth in the way that I was going. Something was going to have to happen if I didn't change. So I had to lose it all. All the money was gone. I'm in a shelter now. No more club now. No more houses now, because when I got investigated, it came down to, FBI looking at me. I'm not trying to go to jail for 30 years or the rest of my life.
Right.
So even though we got exonerated, under the time, we walked away from 52 properties.
Right.
And
I want people to
back.
understand, just to interject really briefly, when you say that you had a club in the Diamond District, I want people to understand what Stan is talking about. You're talking about that area in the 50s. Right?
No, I'm talking about Worst Street. Right by.
So you're talking about down in the financial district,
The
Diamond District.
financial district. We was right on Worst Street, right by City Hall, and right by Wall Street.
That is even more prestige, because the Diamond District is in the 50s on the west side, where there's a lot of diamond merchants. But you had, I want people to get in perspective what Stan is talking about here. You had a club down in basically Wall Street. When you hear people talk about Wall Street and the financial district, Worth Street, this is the area Stan's talking about. All of the investment banks, the World Trade Center's down there, the World Financial Center buildings are down there. This is the area you're talking about. So to have a club down there, who are the patrons of a club in that locale? This isn't a club in Brooklyn. This isn't a club in the South Bronx. This isn't a club where the people with money in New York are the ones who are hanging out down there.
And we called our club the Millionaires Club. That was the name of the club. And the whole concept was, like the Harvard Millionaires Club in Harvard. We were going to get people together, do financial deals and help our people and do all this and do all of that and all these big grand ideas. And I thought that was my purpose. But then God had something else for me. He said, as much being a millionaire, that's not your purpose. Being a club owner, that's not your purpose. This guy that you think you are, this cheating on your wife and divorces and doing drugs, that ain't really who you are either. And all these things you accomplished, that was the guy you were doing all of that. So all that got taken away. Now there ain't no club, no house. I'm homeless with my 2 children, and I'm at the bottom, and I'm getting over a crack addiction. And I had to really come to the point, like, what is my purpose now? I'm suicidal at this point. I'm like, I can't believe that my life has come to this. I don't even want to be here no more. If it wasn't for my kids, That's probably what I might have done. You know, my kids were my reason to live and to forgive myself. You know, which I want to tell everybody out here listening, that was really the key. Before I could ever recover, I had to forgive myself. You know, so I went to Narcotics Anonymous and sat down and listened and shut up like they told me to do. They didn't care about how much money I used to have. They didn't care about me used to be a boy. They didn't care about none of that. What they cared about was that I did not know how to stop using crack, and I needed to shut up and listen to somebody who knew how to stop doing that, no matter who that person was.
Right.
And I did that. I learned, I shut up, I listened and observed people that were able to do what I was not able to do, which was put that drug down. I also got saved. I became a Christian. I gave my life to the Lord. And then I'm still not knowing what I want to do. The real estate game ain't it ain't like that no more. And that's what I had been doing for so long. And that's all I really knew, really. I did other social work jobs and things like that, but it wasn't until I got into community organizing that I found my purpose. Working with students first, and working in Bed-Stuy, where I grew up, where I once ran for office when I was 28 years old, before all my real estate stuff happened. And I kind of returned back to myself, just being in the community. The money's not there no more. You're just a regular guy like everybody else, but you're amongst your community, you're amongst your people, and that is where I really found who I was. You know, and then it went from there to Justice for All, which brings NYCHA into the mix. And now today, I can tell you, I sleep better. When I had all the money, I didn't sleep well at night. People were looking for me. People trying to kill me. I had issues and problems. I'm dealing with violent drugs and all this other stuff. Wow. So I had a very unpeaceful life. You know, the money counts. People don't ever think money brings peace. It doesn't necessarily always do that.
It's a good tool. It's a good tool, but the tool don't build the house.
Right, exactly. I'm more peaceful. I'm by no means rich today. If a couple of, you know, I own one house and I have income, but you know, I'm like most of New York. If things take a bad turn 2 or 3 times in a row, 2 or 3 months in a row, I could be in trouble. Like many other New Yorkers.
Yes.
And so that's what I speak for today. You know, I don't think my purpose was any of those things that I was on the road to doing, because all those things were going to probably lead me to either be dead or in jail. It's a miracle I'm not dead or I'm not in jail on the road that I was going. Today, I wake up and money cannot pay or buy or pay for what I do. If a NYCHA resident calls me and they got issues with mold, lead, I get up, I do that work as though it's a job. And God pays me. You know, God pays me now, and I get the energy from that. And that to me is my purpose now. So it took all the failure, it took all the losing of the house and almost losing my life and all of that to really find out what my purpose was on this earth. And then I tell anyone else, no matter what I don't care if you smoke crack, I don't care if you lost millions of dollars, I don't care if your marriage broke up, I don't care if you're in a homeless shelter now, I don't care if you got people chasing after you, I don't care if you're in a gang and you got people trying to kill you. I've experienced a lot of any of those scenarios. And I'm here to say that, you know, you can survive that. You can come out of that and become a positive force in your community by sharing your experience, and by helping other people who are going through this very same thing that you were going through not too long ago.
Yes. Thank you so much for that, Stan. And I want to say, in a lot of ways, you are probably the quintessential Failure Guy podcast guest. Because as you know, I have Failure Guy expand to an acronym which stands for First Attempts in Learning Using Real Experience. And brother, if there's anybody that's ever been a guest on this podcast that has some real experience, it is you. And I want people to understand, to put in context, I know Stan as a public advocate. I know Stan, full disclosure, I know Stan from his Queen's candidacy. I was working on his website for that. And I'm currently working with him I built the website, and I'm working with him to edit and publish his the updated version of his book, God's Grace. Now, in proofreading that, I'm reading Stan's story, and I'm learning things about him. And all the years that I know, I did not know. Stan, like myself, was a gifted kid. Went to what we call IGC classes here in New York Public School System, intellectually gifted children classes. In addition to that, Stan was a basketball star. And when I say basketball star, I'm not just talking he was good in his school. You can go on the internet. You can look him up. Okay? You can see the press. He was on the road to the NBA. We're talking that level of status. So knowing Stan as I know him, but not knowing anything about what he just shared with you until he came to me a couple years ago and said, look, I got some guys working on my website. They're a bunch of clowns. They're not doing right by me. I was like, well, Stan, you know me. This is what I do. I do websites, but I'll build your whole platform. Let's do this. And then he was telling me, and I remember to this day, I was at a Dollar Tree store in the Bronx. And I'm walking around the store. And I don't even remember what I went there to look for because he's telling me about this book. And I'm hearing, first of all, I want you out there watching or listening to this podcast to understand. Most people who get caught up in crack for 2 to 3 years, they're done. There's no coming back for that. They're either, and I live in Harlem, here now, a couple of blocks from the Apollo Theater, and I walk around the neighborhood sometimes, and there were people sitting in doorways and under construction scaffolding, and they're stuffing their crack pipe. They're homeless. They're disheveled. You know, they're gone.
Yep.
They're. I hate to say it, they're going to die on those streets.
Yep.
That's what's going to be their fate. And for someone to go through it for more than 10 years, and if Stan had not told me and I had not read this in the book, I would not have ever imagined that he would have fallen prey to such a substance, much less for over a decade. And then I knew you'd gone through a number of millions, brother, in the real estate thing, but the number of millions that you just shared with us, I can't imagine ever having access directly to that 40, 50 million dollars of worth of anything, much less to have had that and to have lost it. And here's the thing, the final thing I want to say, I'll turn the mic back over to you, Stan. Most people that have experienced that, that's what drives them to drugs and to drinking.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yeah.
And
right.
Stan has gone through that, suffered that, lost that, and this is him on the other side of that. This is now the man who ran for political office. This is now the man who's a noted and reputed public advocate. On the other side of all those things, most of us cannot imagine those things. Most of us cannot imagine losing that much. Most of us cannot imagine being under the gun, literally having bullets riddle through where we're living, having people chasing us with the intention of taking our lives. This is stuff we see in movies. We don't actually live and experience this. And as you can see here, for those of you watching the podcast, and as you can hear in his voice, this is not a broken man I'm talking to. This is not someone who's a shadow of anything. If anything, he is now the light, okay, that is casting shadows on those who need illumination from his experience.
And I can't take any credit for it, and I look back on it. I give it to God, there's no way I could have survived any of this stuff on my own. So that's why I have the faith, and whatever you call them, God, a higher power, whatever you may call it, I firmly believe, that there is a force, that guides those that believe and have faith. And more importantly, I would say more importantly, but equally important is if I didn't have a purpose, then I would be on drugs right now. If I didn't have a reason to live and to make sense of all these experiences and a way to use these experiences to help somebody else, so I don't got to sit in my room and think about it myself, about what my life was. I could take all that pain of losing that money, all that pain of being in a shelter, all them nights of crying over after spending a bunch of money in crap. And so if I'm sitting there with somebody that's going through those experiences or living in NYCHA with rats and mold and all the things going on with them, I can relate to it. I could relate fully and understand 100%, what they're going to do because I've been through it myself and I know the pain. So I can relate and we can build from there. And I can say, yeah, I've been through that. I'm sitting here trying to help you now. As horrible as I used to be and as crazy as I was, and I did 10 times worse than what you might have ever done, but I could be someone to help you. So now you can go do what you're going through, and then you can turn around and go help somebody else because you're going to get through it. Like I got through it, you're going to get through it. And in that note, I want to announce we're looking to start a citywide NYCHA lawsuit. That's the next thing.
Okay.
And that's a person that will help, who's now homeless, who I helped her 5 years ago when she came to me. And she had lead, asbestos, mold, all these other things. And now she's homeless. She's had 2 strokes. She's suffering from mental depression. She's going through it. So when I'm talking to her, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm hearing her horror story. You know, I can relate to her. You know,
Yes.
we're equals. I got my own horror story, and we could sit there and we could relate, and I could share with her, like, you know, it's hard and it's incredible and it's hopeless as this situation might seem right now. You know, I'm here to tell you that, you know, there is a light, and you will get through this, and it's not going to be the end of you. God got something else for you. There's another. You went through this for a reason, right. And that lady is going to become the plaintiff of a citywide lawsuit. So she will become like the Rosa Parks for NYCHA residents, you know, because she went through all of this, and now NYCHA wants $50,000 from her, and her apartment looks like a bomb went through it, you know. So she's gonna become a face of something. There's so many others are going through. So all that pain and suffering, and I said she's homeless, and they want $50,000 in rent from her. And her apartment looks like a bombshell. How can she be paid? She said, y'all can give her $50,000.
Exactly.
So
at the very least.
Right. Take your pain and turn that into advocacy. Advocacy. And that's what I've done in my life. And I'm advising all those who are suffering. If you suffering through mental health, get yourself together. Help somebody suffering through mental health. If you suffering through homelessness, I know people who are homeless who became homeless advocates and now fight for the homeless. Get involved in the fight for your own self, and then you can expand that to help others who are just like you.
Yes. And
that, to me, is the purpose in life.
And something that you shared with us here, Stan, as we wrap things up here today, that I just think I want to stress that for our audience, is that as you listen to Stan's story, remember, this is a guy that had what we think is it all. Had the wife, had the house, had the millions of dollars. But as you hear him sharing, that was not a purpose. Remember, he fell into a crack addiction having all of that.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
Because all of that was not the substance, was not the thing that woke him up in the morning, was not the thing that made him feel fulfilled inside. So you can have all of that, and it seems great. And again, nobody's saying don't have money. Nobody's saying don't aspire to have things. That's not our message here at all. But if you, as Stan said, if you don't have a purpose, all of that is meaningless. Because, and as I say to people, if wealth, fame, and fortune was enough, then wealthy people would not commit suicide. And we know too many well-known cases of people who had it all. Most recently was Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade. How many people are members of Club 27? And Kurt Cobain, famously the lead singer and songwriter of Nirvana, took a shotgun to his own head.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The guy just jumped off the building. What guy was that? Just famous actors, got it all on TV, doing crack, and I think he was doing meth and crack, which I can't imagine having done. I can't imagine a
what a deadly cocktail. Either one of those.
And then he ends up dying and jumps out of a window and dies.
Yes.
And he has it all: $1 million, TV, fame, fortune.
Yes.
And
young, rich, white, healthy. You know, you'd imagine everything you want. But like Stan said, if you don't have a purpose in your life, then you really, as we see sadly in this ultimate extreme, you don't feel like you have anything to live for. And so listen to Stan's words. You must find, nobody's saying it's easy. Nobody's saying it's instant. And we don't have a formula for you. Each one of us is going to have to find that way, that thing, that meaning, that path. You know, I am famously agnostic. My mother was an ordained Baptist evangelist to the day she died. I am not a denier of faith or religion. I am just saying that in my own self, personally, I can't say that I can define it or give it a name. But as Stan said, whether you call it God, whether you call it eternity, spirit, you know, infinity, whatever, if you have no name for it, find that beacon that illuminates the path towards yourself. This is why I do the Failure Guide podcast, to make you understand that failure is not defeat. Failure is not the end. And none of us, I hope, are ever going to fall as far from as high a perch as Stan did. And Stan is here now, not crying in his coffee, not singing the blues. But as you hear, he gets up and just as a service to humanity does this work. And he trusts that he will be taken care of and be provided for, because he knows that he's got a purpose for waking up each morning. And before that, he had his children, and he knew that he had to be here for them, whatever he was going through. And that was the beginning of the little, maybe it was just a flicker of a candle in the dark.
Absolutely, right at the beginning,
dark. And as long as you move toward the light and not away from it, you're going to find that, like I say, a lot of our quote-unquote demons, that's because we're facing away from the light, and we're seeing this shadow cast because we're looking in the wrong direction. And if we just turn around, we'll see that there's nothing there except the light. We just got to face the light. And whether that's a religious thing for you, whether that's an internal spiritual thing for you, whether you got to meditate, contemplate, whatever you've got to do, turn towards the light, because failure at best is just an instruction. You know, I did a thing, I've mentioned this in the podcast before, a thing called Landmark Education, which is sort of like the grandchild of S. Earhart Seminar Training. Basically, what they say is failure is just an opportunity to assess your performance. And you know this from being a basketball player, Stan, that when you play a game and if you lose, what do? You watch the tape.
Yeah, you got to watch the film. You find out your mistakes, and you got to go out there and correct it. And that's exactly correct. And same in business and anything else. We all gonna fall short. We're not saying we all. Some people will succeed, but if you do fall short, then there's a lesson in that experience. And if you can humble yourself and get to that lesson and apply it and execute it, you know, then you will learn from that failure, no matter what it is. I don't care, in business, life, marriage, whatever the case may be. Right. It's just a setup for success in the future.
Right, exactly. Stan, I would like to thank you so much for joining me here on this podcast. That's why I never refer to these as interviews, they're conversations. As I said, you're someone I've known for quite a number of years now, but I always love having these conversations because I learn so much about my guests, whether they're people I've known for a while or people I'm just getting to meet. And I always learn things and insights. And again, as I say with your book, and folks, go out there. It's available on Amazon. You know, please go and check out this book. You know, it's Stan Morse is his name. Morse like Morse code. Stan like Stan Laurel. The book is called God's Grace. You know, please go and check it out. You know, God's Grace, One Man's Remarkable Path to Finding His Purpose. It's available on Amazon. Look it up. Really, I think, especially if you know anyone who's going through trials and adversities, particularly someone who's caught up in addiction, whether it's alcohol or whatever type of drug or chemical substance, Stan is here. He's living proof that you can go through the horrors of it, and there is another side to come out. Nobody's saying that it's easy, and believe me, my friends, I'm working with Stan now. I'm working with him on editing the final draft of the book before we put out the current edition of it, and he pulls no punches. He tells it like it is. As we were talking, he says, look, I could have made myself look good, but that wouldn't be the story. And sometimes I was thinking, like you said, you were thinking, should I write this? Should I put it this way? Yeah. But it's like, no, that's the truth. That's just what happened. I got to put it out there. And some people that know me may read it and say, what? But hey, that's what happened. And very few people in writing their memoirs are as candid as Stan is in this book. Trust me. You will not be disappointed. Go out, get a copy of that book. And especially if there's someone in your life, get it for them to see that there's nothing they're going through that is specific to them. It might be unique in their experiences because it's happening to them in this time and place, but other people have gone through it, and it is possible. You're not worthless. You're not irredeemable. You can come out on the other side. Like I say, don't look at the shadows. Turn around and face the light. And Stan, how can the folks out here in podcast land, how can they get in touch with you?
You can reach me at email me at stanmorse, j4a@gmail.com, especially if you are someone living in NYCHA. And also I want to say, I'm a board member for Just Fix. So I do this tenant work for NYCHA. But if you are a regular tenant, you know, as a board member of Just Fix, we have the technology to find out information on any landlord throughout the city. We can find out how many violations they have on their building. There's a wealth of information for those who don't live in NYCHA, you know. So I'm a tenant advocate as well as a NYCHA advocate, you know. But to reach me, Stan Morse, j4a@gmail.com. And I won't get my number out. Just send me,
No,
just
no,
send me.
no. That's it. And for those of you who just said that is Stan Morse's first and last name, Stan Morse, J for Jupiter, the number 4, A for Alpha, at gmail.com. His website
Yeah.
is stan-morse.com.
Yeah.
I really advise you folks reach out to them, especially if you are in a situation, you're in public housing here in the New York area. He's, like I said, he's a tenant advocate, he's a NYCHA advocate, and you're not going to get a finer person than Stan to have your back, because he knows what you're going through. He's gone through what you've gone through and more, and he is here, as you've heard him in very passionately sharing with us today. He is here to make sure that he does everything he can to see that the right thing is done. And Stan, once again, I just thank you so much for joining me here. This is going to go up. It's going to be on this Tuesday. All this information, the contact information stuff, folks, will go in the show notes that are going to be published with. You can find this on, well, you're listening to it now. If you're listening to it in podcast world, it's available on Apple, Audible, on Amazon, Spotify, iHeartRadio.com, and wherever fine podcasts are told. And so, once again, Stan, thank you so much. Of course, I will see you on the other side of things as we work on the website and get the book out there and more stuff on stan-morse.com. Thank you so much. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, as I say to those of you out there in the podcast world, remember that failure is not defeat. It's just an opportunity to assess your performance. And life is not a race that you run against anyone. Life is just the path and the journey that you take with yourself. And the only person you have to compare yourself to is the person you were yesterday. So remember, never quit. Keep running. And I will see you on the next episode.
Peace.